Welcome everybody. My name is Karen Edwards and I'm the Director for the Community University Partnership for the Study of Children, Youth and Families, otherwise known as CUP. And I'm so pleased to welcome you to the second talk in our Issues and Impacts series, which also happens to be the first local partnership talk around community-based participatory research and policy. So a little housekeeping. For our session today, we've muted everybody's mics and we're going to ask everybody to make sure that your own personal camera is off so that it's easier for our panel speakers to be seen and heard. We're going to be spotlighting certain speakers throughout the session and the talk's going to be recorded. So we will take questions at the end of the session and I will moderate those. But if you want to throughout the talk, feel free to enter those into the chat box. We have a moderator who's going to pull those questions out and I will pose those to the panel. So before we get too much further, I want to take time today to recognize and speak to the land that we're meeting on. I know there are people on the call that are from various geographical backgrounds, and our group may reach across the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations. Honoring the land we're on and the footsteps that have walked the land before us grounds us and acknowledges the importance of relationships, all forms of relationships. So I want to acknowledge the land on which I'm standing and the wisdom and footsteps that have marked it for generations. And I encourage you to do the same. I am on Treaty 6 land, a traditional meeting ground and traveling route for many Indigenous peoples. By acknowledging this territory, we respect the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nation, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada that enrich our vibrant communities. A treaty is an inheritance, a responsibility, and a relationship. May recognizing our status as treaty people help us to be good neighbors to one another, good stewards of the land, and good ancestors to all our children. I know there are many people on the call today who know CUP, but there may be some who don't. And so I'd like to just take a quick moment to tell you a bit about CUP and the series that we're hosting this year. CUP's a research center housed at the School of Public Health at the University of Alberta. And for the past 20 years, we've worked closely with community organizations, researchers, practitioners, funders, and policymakers in Edmonton, Alberta, and across the province to identify issues of concern to the well-being of children, youth, families, and communities. And in response to those issues, we collaboratively create research and evaluation projects, we generate evidence and mobilize it to improve practices, programs, and policies. We have numerous community partners who have been on this journey with us for decades, and we would not be who we are without them. This year, CUP's celebrating its 20th anniversary, and as part of our celebrations, we've developed the Issues and Impacts series, which will unfold over the next 12 months. Each segment of the series engages field experts and CUP's local research partnerships, like the one we'll hear from today, to discuss issues relevant to the well-being of children, youth, and families. Field experts speak to a current issue of concern, and local partnerships provide a more intimate discussion of the local projects working to understand and achieve impacts on that same issue. On December the 1st, Dr. Shannon Sanchez-Youngman from the University of New Mexico spoke to the issues of leveraging community-based participatory research practices in order to advance system and policy changes for health and social justice. And if you missed her talk, you can find it in the School of Public Health's YouTube channel. We will put that link in the chat box today. But today we're going to hear from Dr. Fletcher, CUP's Associate Director and the Métis Settlement Life Skills Journeys team. I can't stop moving after hearing all that fiddle music in the front end. And they're going to speak about their reflections of 10 years of working in partnership and the policy wins and hiccups that they've experienced over that time. The team's going to explore how institutional and sometimes university policies impact the project, how they respond, and how they implement project level policies that contribute to the success of the project. I must confess I've been very excited about today's talk because I feel the reflections from the team today will provide voice to many of the frustrations that communities have when they work with large institutions, and also illustrates the necessity of pushing the envelope of how we administer and support community-based projects across the board. So it's my pleasure to introduce our presenters today. Dr. Fletcher. Faye can give a wave so you know who she is. Destiny Shalafu. I'm not sure if Kyle is with us today, is he? No, he's still sick. So we send our best wishes to Kyle Matanaskoy and also Andrea Hurley. So this is our panel today. The University of Alberta and the participating Métis settlements have been working together since 2009 to develop and deliver youth life skills programming through the Métis Settlements Life Skills Journeys program. And the research team members joining the discussion today have been with the project for several years. The details that each one of them will share in their introductions. Andrea has supported the project since their inception, and as you'll see, has become not only an expert in facilitating community-based participatory research, but a champion in the project. So over to you, Faye and team.
Thanks very much, Karen. We're really pleased to be here today to share a little bit of what we've learned over our 10 years. Our goal today will be to make direct links between policy and our research process and its impacts. I'd like to begin by stating up front, we're not policy experts, but we do believe we've learned a lot about community-based research over our 10 years together. And in looking back at our long-standing research relationship, we can definitely identify several occasions when we pushed for policies that would allow us to work in ways that were true to the principles of CBPR. In the time we have together today, we want to share some examples of the ways we push the envelope when it comes to university institutional policies that aren't set by us, the policies that we set ourselves within the project, and the policies of the Métis settlements that we respect. We will conclude with reflections on how these actions affected our relationship over several years with settlements. Several of the project team are here today, as Karen has said, all in the hopes to bring to life the experiences of our policy experience. We'll take a few minutes to introduce ourselves and each of our roles in the project. So as Karen said, I'm Faye Fletcher. I'm a professor in public health and recently associate director with CUP, both at the U of A. I've worked with Métis settlements in youth life skills since 2009. It's been a privilege to work with the settlements, and I was able to build upon youth resiliency research I had done with First Nations that began as early as 2005. I'm going to hand it now to first Matana, then Destiny and Andrea to do intros.
Hi there, my name is Matanaskoy and I'm the program coordinator with the project and a current graduate student. I started as a program facilitator as an undergraduate student and was fortunate enough to work in Buffalo Lake Métis Settlement in the summer of 2015. I transitioned into a program assistant once I graduated and worked across settlements to support facilitator training camp. From this into my current initiatives.
Thank you. So I'm Destiny Shalafu. I am from Fishing Lake Métis Settlement and started years ago as a facilitator as well, working in Fishing Lake and Elizabeth, and then eventually moved up to that program assistant role. Yes. Thank you guys for being here.
And I'm Andrea Hurley. I've been a financial advisor with the Faculty of Extension for nearly 20 years, and I've been affiliated with the Métis Settlement Life Skills Journey project for about 7 years since they joined the Faculty of Extension. Part of my role as a financial advisor is to ensure financial policy compliance and navigate transactions through financial processes. And I've had the pleasure of working with this team for quite some time now.
Thanks, everyone. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Fingers crossed. And are you seeing it now? Okay, perfect. Okay, so in the next 30 minutes, we will provide an overview of the project and talk a little bit about why we chose to focus on Little P policy, and then spend a bulk of our time sharing some scenarios that are inspired by real life events, and then talk very briefly, summarize it with some policy impacts and how those policies have impacted our relationships and our research. We'll try to move as quickly as possible through the first section, giving enough information to relay the breadth and depth of the work and the impact over several years without getting into too much detail. We've found this challenging in the past because we love to speak about our work and the years that we've been working with the settlements. I will hand it first to Destiny.
Perfect. So a little bit of my mute. Nope, sorry. A little bit of background on the settlements is Alberta is the only province in Canada with land-based Métis who live in self-governing communities, which are known as the Métis Settlements. There are 8 Métis settlements in Alberta. We've partnered with all except for Paddle Prairie. Part of that was to do with the distance and how far it is from us. And through these partnerships, they vary depending on engagement and relationship. The variation was dependent on readiness of the community demands on HR time, politics within and between communities. We are currently still working with Gift Lake, Peavine, Elizabeth, and Buffalo Lake with some community champions, I think we call them, that are leading programming. So in 2007, Alberta Health Services Safe Communities Funding made 31 recommendations for improving safety, representing a broad range from prevention to treatment. The MSLSJ research began building a relationship with Buffalo Lake Métis Settlement and an advisory committee in 2010 as a small piece of a larger life skills project that was done in Musqueam First Nations. The life skills program fit under the goal of decreasing addictions and mental health. Fortunately, the broadest interpretation, the priorities of the funder and settlement aligned. Our job was to propose a research project that would respond to this call and make successful funding meet the priorities of the community. Success would be dependent upon successful relationships that facilitate open and transparent discussions. So let's begin there.
And so here are some of the research goals that the project really focused on. So from the early phases of research with Buffalo Lake Métis Settlement, that relationship, along with many more, allowed us to achieve some key goals and objectives. The goals were to positively affect resilience among Métis Settlement children through the life skills program and to develop youth leadership so that older youth can deliver the program under the guidance of adult mentors. So back in 2010, the project's first step was to meet with community members to ask whether life skills awareness training was something that they felt was a priority and whether the community was prepared to make the commitment required for a research partnership. We were introduced to members of the Buffalo Lake Métis Settlement, making them our first Métis Settlement partner. From there, we expanded to additional settlements between 2013 and 2016. And in 2018, the grant was extended to 2021. The focus during this time was program sustainability and transition to community. Now the project has been further extended to December 2021 due to undispersed funds due to the impacts of COVID-19 on programming. Moving on to the next slide. The team, composed of both community staff and U of A team members, developed life skills journey resources and made them openly accessible online. We ran summer day camps as well as year-round youth center initiatives in multiple settlements for multiple years. We maintained a website to share research progress and evaluated program impact and influence on youth participants and facilitators. We further mobilized knowledge to settlements and engaged them for sustainability and future partnership development. Now we are re-engaging communities as part of our COVID response, which has included virtual programming and activity kits. So over the last 10 years, the team has developed multiple program resources based on focus groups that have identified priority module topics. This has resulted in the creation of both a facilitator and program assistant manual. Based on the program manuals, the team has developed a 4-week intensive life skills journey content training to prepare facilitators for summer camp facilitation. Training has included opportunities to gain certification in standard first aid, It has included mindfulness, trauma-informed care training, and emotional intelligence workshops. Throughout training and summer camp, facilitators were always supported by full salaries, mileage reimbursement, and per diems.
Excellent. Over these many years, we've also developed what we call our MSLSJ toolkit. And so what we've realized is that in order to capture the impact and evaluate the program, we've had to be constantly adaptable, flexible, very transparent, and learning as we went along. So we started, as Matana mentioned, with doing community needs and readiness assessment. We started very early in the program with pre-post surveys around youth resiliency. Finding those didn't capture the whole picture, we introduced observation and journaling, as well as participant observation. And throughout the process, we constantly engaged as a research group in reflexive discussions. These were debriefs that allowed us to capture those experiences that we could benefit from journaling, but realizing journaling was not a very realistic goal, we set up debriefs. And we've had interviews and focus groups always with all of the facilitators and community administrators and leaders who were available. And finally, in our last few years, we introduced outcome mapping so that we could see how all of the work was influencing various stakeholders in the So just in terms of how the program has developed and what the reach has been, as mentioned, we hire every year youth life skills facilitators who live in and work in the communities. The real goal being to develop capacity in community. So each year we increase the number of hires. Over the full course of the project, 82 community facilitators in 7 settlements were hired and trained to facilitate the programming. Many of them came back multiple years and moved from being junior facilitators to facilitators to program coordinators, and now youth life skills coordinators in settlements. Our camper representation increased each year as well. And we're happy to see a growth between 2013 to 2019 with 569 campers participating. We would have thought that our numbers would be compromised by COVID-19, but in fact, moving to online programming and moving to year-round versus summer, we engaged 160 youth in our 2020 kind of summer fall programming and distributed 250 activity kits. So the reach is still there, which is very nice. In terms of the surveys did show that the youth participants showed an 8% increase in self-esteem, 10% resistance skills, and 16% increased perception of family support. These are trends more than statistically significant because of the pre-post surveys proved to be quite challenging with the youth. And the kids said they don't want to get into drugs or smoking or alcohol. They don't want to be a bully either because it was talked about in camp. So just an opportunity to have those conversations. The facilitators, so these are the youth anywhere from 18 to, honestly, we had 35 to 40-year-old facilitators talking about giving the opportunity to be a facilitator, gave a good feeling to have kids looking up to them, made them feel like they were doing something right. And so just overall, a real shift in facilitators' identity as a role model and their potential impact with the youth through the program. So when we were asked to speak about CBPR, and in particular, CBPR and the life skills program in relation to policy, my first question, I think Karen would agree, was what policy work? But as we began to look more closely at the project over several years, it was quickly very clear there was a lot of little p policy work being done, and that the work was being informed by the principles of community-based research. And that approach helped us achieve our research goals and also remain true to community-based research. So we are looking at little p policies at those at the institutional, department, or in our case, research team level. And they actually create quick wins and lead to larger changes. And our scenarios, we hope, will demonstrate that. So we've developed scenarios based on real life experiences. For each scenario, I'm going to ask one of the team members to present the events that led to a policy discussion, and then the solutions that ultimately served our research partnerships. So our first scenario is going to speak to different experiences around reimbursing employments for employees for expenses they incur. So there are very few ways to transfer money to individuals in order to pay for personal expenses incurred in the line of work, or to pay communities who incur expenses as partners. In some situations, the policies of the university make it difficult to reimburse. The following two scenarios will demonstrate just two of several policy challenges and solutions. So I'll ask Destiny first to set the context.
Perfect, thank you. So we work with settlements located between or around 3 to 5 hours drive from the University of Alberta. In order to be a community based and present in the community, we require staff that were often students to do extensive travel. The following expenses were typically a week working in settlement, traveling for 4 nights in a row. An example of a person, an example is if a person is away 4 days in a week, the hotel cost at the end of the trip may be around $600, plus car rental and gas ranging in an additional $300, which makes this a burdensome cost for a person with a credit card limit of $500 to $1,000. Some staff have credit card limits that prevent them from paying. If the credit card limit allows them to pay, even if they are reimbursed the following Friday, this leaves approximately 1 week where they have been charged the expenses and are unable to pay it off. If reimbursement is not received in time, they incur interest charges, and it has made it even more difficult as there are times when staff travel for 2 consecutive weeks.
So Matana.
Thanks, Destiny. So yeah, the university policy that it includes a particular reimbursement schedule and restricted use of the corporate credit card. And this, of course, would have prevented extensive travel in the scenario that Destiny shared. So we requested hotel and car rental exceptions, allowing the use of the corporate card for hotel and car rental bookings for staff in any of the following cases. So one being when there's a low limit issue, making them, staff unable to use their personal cards for personal expenses. And 2, when they will not be reimbursed in the same week they incurred the travel expense.
Thanks. And Andrea, can you speak to the university response?
Sure. So when the team came to us with the issue, of course, when we're faced with a policy exception, we always need to handle that very carefully. So we need to make sure that it's appropriate and that there isn't really any other options in place that we could implement for them. So with this scenario, I first approached it by seeking some understanding and clarity from the team on the challenge that the staff was experiencing. And through our open conversations with the team, I was able to determine the underlying factor, which Matana and Destiny have alluded to in their speech, and that being that of the low credit card limits were causing some issues for them. So in learning that, I was able to proceed with investigating what options might be available to mitigate the problem for staff. Those open, meaningful, and transparent conversations really became very important because they provided justification for us to build a case and then go back to Supply Management Services, who was the policy owner, and request an exception. Ultimately, that aided us in being successful in obtaining that exception. So the corporate credit card was open to allow them to put hotel expenses, car rental expenses, those expenses that are larger in value, that ultimately, if they were traveling for 2 weeks at a time, their limits on their credit card would be met by the end of that week. So they would have nothing left for the second week. It also aided us in allowing for a clear and concise audit trail to be noted in the event that the expenses were selected for audit either by the university or the funder themselves. So the real takeaway from that was just that when we're deviating from a policy, that we be clear and concise on the need and why we're asking for that policy exception.
Thanks, Andrea. Our second scenario is memorandums, and memorandums are often talked about as an important piece of community-based research, but these are, again, I think a unique perspective as we present a scenario and then talk about how the policy negotiations were done in the design of the memorandums in response to the community needs. So again, Destiny, I'll ask for this scenario.
Thank you. So we're 2 weeks away from offering camps in the settlement. We have just lined up a busing, a cook, and some elders to speak at the camp. In order to prepare lunches and snacks, the cooks need cash to purchase groceries. In order to pay for busing, we must cut an off-cycle expensive check in order to offer protocol and honorarium to elders. There's also paperwork to complete and forms to sign. All of these delays make it difficult, if not impossible, to meet short deadlines.
Thanks, Destiny. So from the beginning of the project in 2010, the goal was always to lead an established youth resilience program with the settlements and to accomplish this in partnership. As our relationships grew and we faced ongoing challenges for paying for local services and settlement, it became increasingly clear that a memorandum or agreement of each other's contributions and financial commitment to those contributions made a lot of sense. It not only clearly articulated our responsibilities and left the authority and day-to-day management of the program in the hands of the communities as much as possible, but it also fostered a nimbleness that we did not have at the university. It also provided ways in which we could respect the autonomy of the settlement's right to self-govern as their policies and procedures were respected in the details of the agreement.
And Andrea.
So with the memorandums of understanding that were created, the Life Skills Journey created their memorandums and they sent them through to our office, and we engaged with supply management services just to ensure that any financial and contractual information was contained within them. And also part of that was that we wanted to be clear and concise about what we needed to ensure that the camps ran successfully. Part of that was asking for a policy exception to the standard net 30-day payment terms. We were asking that our suppliers or settlements be set up as vendors with a 0-day payment plan. So they would get paid immediately. We were successful in obtaining that policy exception because we explained to them that we didn't want our settlements to incur any financial hardships in running these camps. Part of the MOU process was that when they were to be paid, they would send in a paper invoice to us. I think it was about a year into that process, we learned that the university was moving to an electronic submission process. And immediately upon hearing that, I did connect with the Life Skills Journey team because I knew that was going to have some implications for them. And would probably bring up a lot of fears, and I thought it would be a good idea if we could alleviate those ahead of this process actually being implemented. So what we did was we sat down and we mapped out the process so that we could communicate to our settlements how that new process was going to work. Part of that also involved one of the Life Skills Journey members sitting down with our settlements and just explaining to them how to create an invoice, what information needed to be on the invoice in order for it to be paid, and then ultimately emailing that invoice to a generic email. We knew the generic email was going to cause some issues. They had been accustomed to sending in invoices to members that they had developed trusted relationships with. So in order to alleviate those concerns, we suggested in administration that perhaps when they sent that email in, they could CC one of the Life Skills Journey team members. And that just, we felt would help them assure that it was getting to a trusted individual and that they would ensure that that submission was acted on and paid. And then as a follow-up to that, the administration team, for the first few invoices that were submitted, we worked through that payment process with them. So we would let them know that, yes, we received your invoice. We let them know that when that invoice would be paid. And then when the invoice was paid, provided a reference number for them to watch for that to come through to them. So the takeaway really from that was just to consider the cultural differences. They aren't accustomed to the electronic means of communication that we see in our everyday life. So we needed to have empathy for that and take steps to preserve those relationships that we had developed with our crucial partners there.
Thanks, Andrea. And our final scenario deals with human resource policies and shared supervision. So one of the things that we've talked about is the hiring of several facilitators who live and work in settlements. And that brought in a whole another layer of administration and policy. So the scenario here demonstrates shared administration and leadership between the U of A team and the settlement administration, respecting each other's authorities and cultures. And Destiny, you get to set the scene again.
Thank you. So we work closely with settlement administrators and community directors several weeks before the life skills journey camps start to recruit, interview, and support settlements to hire around 4 to 8 program facilitators. This involves collaboration on coordinating resume reviews, scheduling interviews, and co-facilitating interviews with administration. While the life skill team provides recommendations, the final hiring decisions are left at full discretion of the settlement's hiring policies and processes. Following the hire of summer camp, facilitators will lead a 4-week intensive training program that prepares the new and returning youth leaders to deliver summer camp. Both facilitators training and summer camp is guided by shared supervision by the program assistants, who are supported by both settlement administration and the life skills team. While the facilitators are employees of the settlement, they are largely supervised and trained by the program assistants that work within the life skills team. The program assistants are the first contact for resolving any conflict within the training or camp, whereas the settlement administrators are the final decision makers for any major conflict resolution.
Thanks, Destiny. So yeah, in response to the need to set parameters for how conflict resolution would be managed through a shared supervision approach, the life skills team drafted an employee code of behavior for administration to review, modify, and approve. This code of behavior set very clear expectations around maintaining a respectful, safe, and positive work environment and program for youth. Building off this code of behavior, many administrators expressed the need to develop a conflict resolution procedure that outlined how issues were addressed and, if needed, how conflict resolution was escalated. So another example involved the life skills team developing a social media policy to clarify guidelines for the management of the life skills social media channels, and to encourage people to speak to administration or the life skills team if there are any work-related concerns that are better suited for a discussion rather than posting about it online. So incorporating these policies at the start of facilitator training helped to establish a strong partnership with administrations that foregrounded settlement HR policies and made clear a framework for shared supervision.
Thanks, everybody. So, you know, a few examples to show how we have used the principles of community-based research to really inform some of the policy development. And then in turn, how taking that approach and making the policies align was really one of the core reasons why we were able to sustain and have such a long, impactful research partnership. So some of the key principles around community-based research, one that really stands out for me is identifying community as a unit. And settlements have policies that we adopted or used to inform our institutional policies. They are communities that are based on geographic locations with their own history and self-governing bodies. So as much as possible, we would respect and adopt their policies. Andrea had a good comment in one of our conversations that without community, we don't have a research project. So that I think had a really strong impact on how strong an advocate Andrea became for our project as she got to know us. The co-learning and capacity building, again, Andrea spoke to learning how that culture worked and how we can fit into our culture and to maintain relationships was key. So I really think about this as, you know, we often talk about building capacity of community. A lot of our examples here really demonstrate building the capacity of the institution in order to do successful community-based research, in particular in policy development. Communication and transparency was a high priority throughout all of the examples. We needed to be very clear with each other about what we're attempting to achieve and why we're attempting to do that. Andrea again shared a story as we were reflecting back on these scenarios where if she couldn't understand immediately how the policy could be made to fit between the two cultures, she would ask for a meeting with members of the team to say, okay, tell me the story, give me the example, and that way we could work through some of the options. And then a cyclical and iterative process. So it might start with small steps, good examples of building trust between the researcher and the faculty HR, and then between Andrea and the more central bodies. So building relationships, trust, track record, and a reputation for doing good work. I understand we're pulled often for audits, and the audits are quickly closed as the clear justification is provided through all of the documentation. So people become champions for the work and are invested in the success of the projects. And my takeaway from this is who knew policy was such relational work? So with that, I think we will open it up for any Q&A that might have come through the chat, Karen.
Fabulous, Faye. Thank you so much. Maybe you can take your screen share down and we'll attempt to answer some of the questions that people have. I encourage anybody who has a question, please put it into the chat box. I'm really taken with the your last piece, which was the relational nature. And it's funny because in community-based research, we always think about the relationship between the researchers and the communities themselves. But what I find so interesting and rich about your discussion is it's the relationship with the institution, with Andrea. And it's funny because we don't always herald those champions we have in those spaces in the institution to say, people in those spaces leaning in and saying, you know, if we don't have a community, we don't have a project. And if, you know, we need to figure out how to work well together. So you've provided a ton of really interesting reflections. And I know that one of the things that was said along the way was the establishment of sustainability for this project for the communities, so that you're in the stage of sort of transferring this process. And I'm curious from anybody on the panel about how do you feel the lessons you've learned in this process, and not just today's presentation, but of course 10 years of work. How will any of the learnings in this policy space, will they transfer in any way? I mean, I realize we're talking institutional to community, but perhaps there's learnings about how you've managed things over time that will sustain themselves for the community.
I'll start and then I'll let others speak. I think as I look at the sustainability piece, and one of the things we didn't get to was a very clear example of how we were able to respond in COVID time. So because we've built these relationships and trust, we were able to go back to settlement administrators and ask them about how we might support them. And so that became a little piece around, you know, again, looking at, so we have particular research goals and objectives and policies, but they all get shifted significantly when your whole plan of action moves. So how do we respond to emergencies and have those conversations and look at the ways that we move either activities or funding or agreements into a new space? And so I think it's really interesting because, again, talking to any of the team members, this is something that builds up over 10 years. We can have the conversations because we have, you know, this kind of institutional and project memory that we can refer back to. And so when we talk about the importance of longevity in community-based research, that's the kind of longevity that you need in order to be quickly responsive in either activities or policies. And so I'm not sure whether any others want to pick up on that at this point or open another question. Just unmute if you're have some thoughts.
Well, maybe I'll move on to the next question. I have a question here in the box. It says, I'm curious to know if these little P learnings have been or could be shared across the institution. So for example, with other faculties, other departments, other institutes, and I'm sure, Andrea, you've had opportunities to, you know, share what you've learned over the years with others, but I'm curious about, I mean, obviously that infiltrating the university is always a, you know, nice subversive goal to have.
So I think definitely, I think there is an opportunity there to share that across campus. I think the more that we can learn from each other, the better. And often I find that's when the best learning actually often occurs, is when you are talking to other people on campus about situations that have arisen. Sometimes we don't realize that everybody's sort of having those same sorts of issues. It might be a different research project, but the same sort of issue might come up. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity to share learning across campus and how different situations have been handled.
And I would add that these are a few examples that we pulled out, and there are so many more of, you know, there was conversations about it's the language that you use on a particular form that will indicate its appropriate use and its fit within the policy and the processes. And it's really learning that, you know, what is the accurate language to reflect the activity and then why it fits within a certain policy or under a certain domain. There's just so many nuances around policy that allow us to align the cultures rather than have them become confrontational conversations. And I think that was one of the other things that came out was, you know, that desire to make it work across many kind of lived experiences or perspectives is key to this work. And often there's a history that makes it maybe more natural to be confrontational than collaborative. And I think we need to focus on that collaborative frame. Yeah.
I have another question here, and I think it relates to the, one of the examples that you gave about how, I think it was Destiny, you introduced the one with people, you know, the facilitators having to do a lot of travel, but that travel costs money. And there's expectations about being able to cover that. And lots of researchers may not think about that element to the work. It's just an assumption. Community members are going to do it and they're going to go and it's going to be great and that's a nice thing. But there's a reality to that for people who are taking this on themselves. So the question was, many researchers don't know what to do with the ethical barriers, like reimbursing staff, like you gave in that example. What kind of actions would you recommend for researchers to consider? Is there some upfront things that need to be discussed that, you know, you guys discovered later on you hadn't thought about, so you should have done it sooner? Or I'm curious about that.
So the ethical barriers. So we've talked about, you know, the process, the procedural, those kinds of barriers to compensating folks. In terms of ethics, a lot of it, I'm just thinking back to some of what I've been taught. People will hesitate to pay people for time. Honorarias become a conversation often, you know, what's a fair, you know, amount to pay for particular activities, and when do you pay cash and when do you pay out of a check because they may be able to be set up on a contract. And I think that it's starting to recognize that there are many people who give a lot of time and share a lot of knowledge, and we are more prone to undervaluing that than giving it fair compensation in many cases. So the ethic of it for me, I'm trying to think about an ethical question around that. I think it's valuing knowledge. and knowledge that is not traditionally valued the way it should be in higher levels of learning. Yeah.
Anything from anybody else on the team you want to add into that, or?
Yeah, I could share. I think, reflecting back on the last 5 years and thinking through, how to facilitate and support facilitators and traveling to other settlements for training and camp, and, those opportunities, I think something that has really helped that is to understand how the settlements support travel and per diems and mileage. So following what the settlements have in place is really what is necessary to have that sustainability piece at the forefront, not imposing how the university may do it. It's really prioritizing how the settlements approach reimbursement and travel.
And I think maybe sometimes that's a forgotten detail, but an important one that then has a ripple effect to lots of other implications in trust, in relationships, and things that you can't imagine. And those things sometimes remain what's unsaid. That's the reason I was so excited about this, because these are the kinds of presentations where we're kind of peeling back the surface on things that have unfolded in a project. And these are the things when you're sitting at the table going, no one ever writes about that stuff. No one ever talks about this stuff. And I think it's really interesting. And it is an important thing in creating relationships with communities. So I have another question here. Someone asked, I was wondering, did the policy changes extend beyond this project, or would every project team have to negotiate some exceptions with supply management services, for example? So I don't know if that's an Andrea thing, whether there was a ripple effect into the system.
I think with policy exceptions, it's really a case-by-case basis. So like with Life Skills Journey, we would implement a policy exception, and it was for the life of the project. And I mean, we had lots of different instances that came up where things didn't quite fit into the policy. I mean, I think we have to remember that policies really they're there, but they're also sort of a guideline. And a policy, when it's developed, is going to be for situations that happen on an ongoing basis, just very general situations that everybody's facing. And you are going to find with a policy that there are times when something doesn't quite fit into it and you need to deviate from it slightly. But I think that's where the justification piece really becomes very important to why you are deviating from the policy. And yeah, so I think it really was a case-by-case basis for this project.
And I'm curious, because I know, Andrea, you supported in your faculty a lot of community-based research projects.
Yeah.
Did the learnings that you gained in that particular project with Métis Settlements Life Skills translate to how maybe you understood or engaged with other projects at other times?
It absolutely did, because we had other researchers within our faculty that were also working with Indigenous communities. So we could take a lot of the learnings that we had from the Life Skill Journeys team, and we would transfer those over to those projects as well, because a lot of the same things would come up, maybe in a different capacity because the research was different, but we definitely had other instances where we could apply that learning.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Faye.
I'm just thinking about whether the question of whether we were able to influence policy across the institution. And I think there's a bit of a chicken and egg thing going on in some policy frames, because when another conversation we had was elders signing for honoraria. And because there are a lot of people doing that kind of work, that policy at an institutional level has changed, where people can sign on behalf of the elder, so that very uncomfortable, can you sign for this honoraria conversation doesn't have to happen. I think that some of the exceptions that we got in our project, like the travel, the car rentals, the hotels and food, is because we are so community placed. The work is happening in community at such an extent that we had to ask for exceptions. And I think that if more projects could realize their work happening in community the same way, it might tip it into more of an institutional policy change rather than exceptions on a project by project basis. So you kind of have to hit that tipping point of the work being done, and then have champions in there like Andrea teaching how to change institutional policy.
Well, it's a good challenge.
Yeah.
I'm going to, I have two questions. I'm going to reverse them a little bit because I think one of them relates to where we just you just left off, Faye, which was there any thought ever in the process given to using an intermediary organization with different policies rather than taking the time to try and sort of get the university to change its policies? And is there any sense that those learnings or changes are going to survive in the system?
So I'll answer the first piece because it is something that we've thought about, whether the work would be better done in an institute, not an institution, but in some intermediary, like we've talked about partnerships with external, that then there's a university community partnership like CUP, right, around this work. And so that's a possibility that we have been exploring because of our project being funded and then the funding being extended. We weren't into a new proposal that would change the holder of the funds, which would change the policy body as well. So we have that potential moving forward. In conversations with the settlements, they really want the association with the university. It builds credibility for the project and the work within the settlements. So there's a little bit of a, maneuvering dance to be done in that next phase. So that piece, what was the second question? Because I think it will be more an Andrea question.
Complementary. It's any sense of how the learnings or changes will survive in the institution. And Andrea, your name was connected to that, but I think it could be anybody commenting.
I think we have to have more people being champions for it to make that new learning be sustained across campus, especially where community-based research is involved. It's not, a lot of the times, like I said before, it doesn't just fit into a policy that we have. So it becomes a bit of a challenge sometimes and maybe even a roadblock to moving research ahead. And the university is very much research oriented. So I think we need to change the thinking. And I think if we can change the thinking, then I think we can sustain it.
So here's the next question. Given your success with little p policies, do you have any thoughts or plans for working with your partners to address big P policies that might be impacting the settlements?
So, okay, I'm always jumping in first, and then I'm going to call on others to talk. It's interesting because the settlements are self-governing bodies that set their own policies. So we're not really in a position to be changing, the settlement policies. So we really have to work at changing the institutional policies of the university. So that will be the big policy push we do. Actually, I'm thinking about that. That's not even true. There are Indigenous-based organizations that we could try to push policy around as well. Are we the folks to do that? Destiny, maybe I'll call on you. Policy, the one I think of is Métis Settlement General Council. They're really an independent, self-governing, they set their policy. And you know a little more about their character.
I'm just trying to gather my words, but I don't know. I feel like just instead of having them change it, I think it should be the university change for it, because really we're the guests in their area. We shouldn't be kind of pushing them to change their policy to work with us. It should be the other way. So I don't know. This is my opinion. I don't know too much about policy. So I don't know. I just, coming from a settlement and knowing my dad's been a political leader amongst the communities. I just think that, I think it's more of like a respect thing, having us work around it as opposed to making them, because truthfully, I don't think there's so much going on that I don't think that they would be able to, or they wouldn't be as invested or interested in our program if it was more work for them, if that makes any sense.
Destiny, you know what, you captured it so well. We are guests. I mean, and that's not something that, you know, people will quickly go to. One, being a guest. So as a guest, you're not going to be changing. But the other is, you know, the settlements at all times and the administrators are always under so much pressure and such a load, and it's extrapolated now, exacerbated now with, you know, the pandemic. So thanks. That was a good capture.
Maybe the last question we have time for, and this probably could be something that all of you might be able to respond to. Is there any sense of the time that the team spent on the policy change pieces that were needed and actually getting the work done that you needed to do? Because it's an acknowledgement, I think, lots of times of how many conversations do we have to have about trying to get this little thing done that we're not then spending on getting into the communities and doing the work that we know needs to be done, and working and partnering with them.
That's a very fair question. I know, like, looking hindsight, it sounds so, you know, oh, the relationship and the conversations, and Andrea could probably talk to this. There was a lot of frustration by, I think that Andrea experienced. She was the receiving end of frustration by the research team, you know, about the amount of justification and the paperwork and the emails and all the follow-up that needed to occur. And she's going to speak to it. Thanks, Andrea.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, there was a lot of conversations that happened that, you know, probably did take away from meaningful work. But at the end of the day, when those transactions were pulled for audit, I think it was worth the time that we put into it, because if we didn't put the time in then we're probably going to have to put it in later when audit looks at it and says, so why are you doing this? This is outside of university policy, or, you know, this is completely unacceptable. We had all of our justification there. So I really think the work would have been put in anyways.
Any thoughts from Destiny or Matana?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Andrea in that, like, a lot of the work around the little p policies, you know, I feel like you can't so much separate them from research. Like, they kind of go hand in hand. Like, when I'm just thinking of, you know, the employee code of behavior, social media policy, like, those are spaces that, you know, you're meeting with administrators and community leaders to not only talk about that, but to talk about, you know, other components of training and camp. That, you know, it's so blended. So I don't personally see them as separate, if that makes sense.
I would have to agree with that. I think in order to move forward, you have to have those conversations.
Excellent. Anybody else? Any other comments on that?
I think too, it also builds, it's relationship building too. It's not just sitting down talking about a policy, it's building those relationships and then becoming a champion, as Faye said, for the project, and having a vested interest in the project and seeing that project be successful.
Andrea, that's a lovely way to finish, I think. So for somebody who didn't quite know why she got involved with this, I'm really glad. I'm super thankful to every single one of you on the panel today. It's been a really interesting, and again, I think it's one of those conversations that we don't have very often. I encourage everybody who's on here today, in the chat box, we've put just a bit of a survey just to see what you thought of the session today. We will be hosting more. February is our next session. We'll have the announcements come out in January about that and the timing of those. And I also want to say, again, just a huge thank you to everybody in the background who makes the webinar or our session here today work. Our team in CUP, which remains invisible at the moment, is a resource that I'm blessed with. And so thank you so much to everybody for your time. We've hit the 1 o'clock hour, so to respect that. The recording will be available on the School of Public Health channel probably sometime next week. You will get an Eventbrite message to send you a link to that, as well as to the survey again, to let people know. And feel free, I would encourage people, if you have heard the presentation today and thought there's somebody that I work with who'd be really good and great if they could hear this, pass it along. I think that's part of the point. Thank you so much. Next Friday is Christmas Day, and I hope that everybody has an incredible restful, much deserved break. And we look very much forward to connecting with everybody again in the new year. Thanks so much.